Have you ever harvested something from your garden only to find that it goes to waste because no one in your family wants to eat it? Not because it doesn't look beautiful, but because people just suddenly have gotten picky or lost interest in eating healthy at all? It happens a lot, and we're going to talk about it. So I was looking through my inbox this morning and a question came up that really caught my attention and made me want to do a video on it. And it was a question from Jenna. And I really appreciate it, Jenna, because it definitely gave me an opportunity to talk about this, which is something I've been wanting to talk about for quite some time. And Jenna writes, Luke, do you have any tips to help me convince my family to be more enthusiastic about gardening? I've had a garden for 3 years now and I love it, thanks to you. I appreciate that, Jenna. But whenever I harvest something, no one will eat it. Everything looks fine, they just suddenly get picky and unsupportive. Even my mom, who really wants us to eat healthy, just lets things rot in the fridge. I know I can't force them to like it as much as I do. Any thoughts though? Thanks. So Jenna, like I said in the beginning, this is a common problem. This is a problem that has happened in my household, it's happening in your household, and you'd be shocked, Jenna, and those watching this, that this is a question we get all the time. I would say about 5 to 10 times a week, we'll get questions from moms, sometimes kids, like in your case, Jenna, husbands, wives, even grandparents. We get this from all different types of people, basically wanting to encourage their loved ones to eat healthier. They get stuff from the garden, they bring in this bountiful harvest, it sits there and just goes to waste. And they think to themselves, what is going on? They're going to the grocery store and buying lettuce even though I have lettuce. They'll harvest a tomato and they'll still go to the grocery store and buy a tomato. Why is this? Why are my family becoming so picky? Why is my family not supportive of this free food that I am producing? Thousands of years ago, we had foraging. Foraging was the most primitive form of food production. We let nature grow its food. We found out through trial and error what was edible and what was not through tasting it. And if someone died, we knew that that was not edible. If it tasted bad, we knew it was not edible. There are certain things that we just kind of inherently knew were not good about food. So certain colors became associated with edibility, certain flavors, certain aromas. If certain animals were eating this, that became an association with us with edibility. There's a whole lot of things kind of ingrained into the human culture when it comes to foraging. Well, then when foraging kind of became too difficult, people didn't want to go out and continue looking further and further and further for food. They decided to bring food closer to home. That was done in a village setting where one person, it was during the specialization era where specialization, someone was a tool maker, someone was a farmer, someone was the city council, whatever that, there was a lot of specialization going on. That person brought food to the town. Then when that became too difficult and the expansion happened where cities or villages turned into cities, what happened was there needed to be more food production. And that's where people then said, okay, well, if my wife is going to be staying at home, at the time it was typically the mother, but it could also be the father too. If I'm going to be staying at home and doing this, I better provide for my family, I better provide food for my family. So there was typically a garden at the house. That was done for centuries, if not millennia, where the food was grown at the house. And then as we became more accustomed to working more, spending less time at the house, prioritizing convenience, we started to give that freedom up to farms. And the farms then said, well, I don't want to sell directly to the consumer, I want to sell volume to supermarkets. So they sold to supermarkets. And since supermarkets have a priority to take care of their bottom line and profitability, they said, well, hold on, farms, if we're going to buy from you, we want to buy a specific type, a specific color, so whatever's going to sell the best, have the best shelf life, and help us the most. Not necessarily help the customer, but just help us. And that then really got us so far away that every single time you looked at a movement with agriculture, or food production in general, we got further and further away from biodiversity and the natural food. So this garden here is 2 steps removed from natural foraging. A lot of times you'll take people that are only accustomed to the grocery store model, and they'll look at what we're growing, and you have what is considered it's called an investment trust paradigm. This is what happens when you put money into something. If I don't feel confident, right, in my abilities, or if I don't trust something, or I don't have knowledge of something, I'm going to invest my money, or whatever you're investing, into someone else that does. And this happens a lot with anything. For instance, if a big example of this is mushrooms. People don't want to end up dying, so they trust other people to harvest their mushrooms. You trust with your money that that person is going out and is actually learning what it takes to either cultivate or forage these wild mushrooms. If I go out on my own, I might be able to identify a mushroom, but there will still always be that thought in my head, well, what if? What if it's poisonous? What if it kills me? This doesn't seem like food. And when that happens, you don't, because it was free and because you have that lack of knowledge, there's no investment, and there's not enough knowledge to support that chemical reaction that happens from the brain to the stomach that says this is food. And this is what's really crazy, is that this actually happens on a macro scale when it comes to food that you're growing in your garden. A lot of people will take this food that's growing for free, right? It might not look like the tomatoes in the store. It might not look like the cucumbers in the store. It might not look like whatever it is in the store, even though it's just as healthy, if not healthier, than what's being provided in the store, because the biodiversity is available to us as gardeners, and it's not available to supermarkets. And you'll take, for instance, a purple potato. A purple potato, this is the craziest example, because my dad is a prime example of this, and that's something that I battled, where he did not have the knowledge of purple potatoes. I did. I could eat them all day long, and I was perfectly happy because I knew that was food for me. But if I took that purple potato and put it on his plate, he would be just as content going hungry than eating it. He did not want to eat a purple potato. Same thing with purple carrots, yellow tomatoes, it didn't matter. He wanted what the supermarket sold him because he trusted the supermarket. His stomach trusted the supermarket because your stomach also tells you what's good and bad tasting. As humans, we don't like things that taste bad. And if we think something's going to taste bad, generally our stomach loses appetite, which tells us not to eat it. This goes back to that primal instinct that I talked about earlier with, if we tasted something that tasted bad, we knew it wasn't edible. But nowadays, because we've been so conditioned, Jenna, we've been so conditioned that your mom and your family and everyone else watching as well, that if we don't think something is edible, we're going to tell ourselves, or if we don't think something's going to taste good, or if we don't think something's going to be edible, whatever the circumstance, our bodies will not register that as edible food, as crazy as that seems. And a prime example of this is with kids. You see kids all the time saying this. I don't like broccoli, it makes me sick. Or I don't like beans, it's going to make me throw up. Well, what happens? They never even tried it, but as soon as they try it, if they're willing to try it, they realize it didn't make them sick. But if they're allowed to think at their own volition that it's going to make them sick, what happens is that actually happens. They'll end up gagging and throwing up because they thought so strongly on this thought that it was going to make them sick that that's what happened. The second thing is because we are really so accustomed to convenience that we forget that what we're harvesting is an actual ingredient. A lot of times, and I'm guilty of this, a lot of times we go to the store, we just buy a can of like spaghetti sauce, for instance, or pizza sauce, whatever it is. Or you get some herbs from the garden, or you get some herbs in a little jar. They're dried and crushed already and ready to go. You get those from the store. Well, when you grow them, you think to yourself, I've got this, now what am I going to do with it? And you take so much effort wondering what you're going to do with it that you end up not doing anything with it, and then it goes to waste. It's this lack of knowledge again. It goes back to this lack of knowledge and lack of confidence that you can turn a raw material into a food, which has already been done for you due to convenience. What has happened is we've just become so conditioned that whatever they have at the store is like ready and good to go. That if you look at the garden and stuff coming from the garden, you just you just gap. Your mind just goes blank, and it's like, well, I don't even know what to do with all of this stuff. Even though had you gotten it from the grocery store, you would have had a plan for what you want to do with it. And that also kind of ties into how we shop. So the traditional American style of shopping, I get this is, there's people probably watching this all over the world, but the traditional American style shopping, as bad as it is very wasteful. We no longer, for instance, France is very good. Europe is very good with this, where you go to a grocery store for what you need for that day, or maybe 2 days down the road, and you use what you have. It's very fresh. It's very hands-on. However, when we go to the grocery store here in the United States, people will load up their cart like it's the end of the world, and I'll be sitting there with this small little hand cart with a few vital essentials, and people will be looking at me like, is this guy like crazy? Like, I'm looking at them like, are you crazy? Like, is the world ending and I'm not aware of this? We have 3 different problems here. One of them is around knowledge. That can be fixed by getting your family in the garden. Get them involved in the garden. Help them to learn. Maybe make them pick out the stuff that they want to grow, so they see it growing from start to finish. Excuse me. And they want to actually eat what they grow. So you have a lack of knowledge that can be fixed. You have a disconnect between the supermarket and the grocery store, or a disconnect between the supermarket and the garden, kind of where our food actually comes from. That can be done by getting them in the garden. Now again, this is kind of a common thread here you can see. You want to get them in the garden because that's going to reconnect them with where their food is coming from. You cannot assume, and this is the biggest mistake people make, you cannot assume that if you just take stuff into the house that it's going to be used. Because if they've never been associated with the garden and they're just a recipient of the vegetables, they're still going to have a disconnect. You might have a stronger connection, but they have just as little of a connection as they had before, even though it's sitting right in front of them. They have to go out and actually be a part of it. And then the next thing is, I would strongly recommend sitting down with your family, or those watching that have this problem. Sit down with your family, come up with a game plan and say, look, this food is going to waste. This is food. I know you all are having a hard time giving up that part of going to the grocery store and buying what you think is food, but this is equally as food. And if it is, and it is going to waste, how can we address it? How can we try to incorporate this in small baby steps? That's something that's really going to help to create more of a dialogue. And the final thing that I want to discuss is being the change that you want to see. You know, this is not just a very cliche Gandhi quote. This is a true statement that before my family was ever excited about eating different unique foods, I had to be the one to make my own food to show them that I was eating it and it tasted good. If they wanted to eat it, and that was fine. If they didn't, that was fine too. But I made my own food. I used from the garden what I was harvesting, so they saw that there was confidence. They saw that there was knowledge there. And through curiosity, they were then excited to try something else. Once they tried it, they realized it wasn't that bad, and slowly but surely they started to convert. And that's really where a lot of change begins, is just by you being the change in your household. You know, I know so many people that say, well, I'm just going to not be the one to, I'm not going to be the one to cause any disagreements. I'm just going to go with the flow. It's their house, their rules. I'm going to let them make the food, and nothing ever happens. And if you just step in and say, hey, look, I'm going to make my dinners because I don't want this food to go to waste. This is stuff that I'm growing from the garden. You know, hey, if you want to try some, great. If not, that's okay too. That comes from you have to have a level of open-mindedness to understand that that you cannot force someone to do something that they don't yet feel comfortable with. It's easier said than done to break that chemical signal, because the brain is so strong. It will do so much to resist any type of change, because we are such conditioned human beings. And that is really at the heart of all these issues, is just conditioning. And the grocery store model has really done a great job of poorly conditioning us to assume that food is going to be there tomorrow, that this is the type of food we should be eating, that this is what society accepts. And it's just done a very big disservice to the gardening community. So with that being said, I open up the comments box to a wonderful dialogue. if you would, please chime in. I would love to hear what you have to say. As always, I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you learned something new. And as always, be the change that you want to see in your household. Grow big or go home, and I'll see you all tomorrow.